Hi, are we ready to start? Okay, I'm Teresa Zorro. I'm with Random House, and I just want to welcome everybody. I can't see you, but I feel your excellent energy out there. I feel like I know some of the people are out there, which are our wonderful readers, our major book lovers who show up for so many of our events, particularly open house. So I want to give a big shout out and hello and a thank you. I really appreciate people showing up for this event. Especially, it's a beautiful summer night, and I know a lot of people are trying to get back and out, but we do appreciate that you're showing up to be here with our authors and to discover our books. As you may know, that this event was originally designed all about discovery and about bringing people together, about connection. We always said that it was about author to reader, so the author connecting with the reader and readers connecting with readers, because we know book people love book people. So even though we are still in a virtual space, we ask you to try to connect and be present and just give us so much of your good energy and enthusiasm, and welcome all of our wonderful authors who've joined us tonight. We're so happy that they can be here, and I just want to say thank you so much to all of the authors and to all of you who continue to support our writers and come to our virtual events and share and post and just help us spread all of the book love. So tonight I'm going to turn it over to Katie Darcy, who is going to be the MC. She's going to lead you through the program. She's going to do my favorite thing, which is to give away all the wonderful prizes. I love that part, but she's going to take it over, and I'm going to pass it over to you, Katie. Have a great night, and I can't wait to hear from all of these wonderful authors.
Thank you so much, Teresa. I am so excited to be here tonight for this summer open house. Hi, everyone. I'm sure I know some of you out there in the audience. Again, to reiterate what Teresa was saying, thank you so much for being here this evening. Before we dive into tonight's exciting program, we have just a few housekeeping things to go over. Random House has enabled auto-generated closed captions for this evening's event. To access the closed captions, please click Live Transcript at the bottom of your screen. Please bear with us. These captions are auto-generated, so they may not be 100% accurate, but we will do our best. Please connect with other readers, which I already see you're doing out there in the chat. We'd love to hear your thoughts, of course, what you're reading, and how you're enjoying your summer so far. We just ask everyone, please stay respectful in the chat. Random House will be providing the link to each of our panelists' books that are currently for sale in the chat. Before we keep going, I need to give a huge shout out thank you to all of our wonderful partners. Our special thank you to Fairy Tale Brownies, Stranahan's Blue Whiskey, Talbot's, Blue Sky Fibers, Sips by, Trade Street Jam Company, and Balak Tea. Guests should have already received a virtual gift bag, which included discount codes from all of these wonderful partners, with a free audiobook code for Debbie May Comer's It's Better This Way read by Therese Plummer from Libro FM. If you haven't received your virtual gift bag, just please email pr@randomhouse.com and we'll be happy to get that sorted for you. Your promised e-galley of Jodi Picoult's new book, Wish You Were Here, will be sent out tomorrow. So thank you for your patience on that. Your ticket, of course, also allowed you to pick out one of these incredible books by one of our featured authors, and all of the books will start shipping out tomorrow. As Teresa mentioned, we'll also be raffling off some fun prizes throughout the evening. So all raffle winners were selected prior to the event at random. So now let's kick it off with our first two raffles for this evening. Who doesn't love a tasty dessert while reading a fantastic book? Our first raffle this evening is a summer package with blondies, brownies, and cookies from Fairy Tale Brownies, along with a copy of Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. And congratulations, our winner for our first raffle is Neha Patel. So congratulations, Neha. For our second raffle, we are very excited to be raffling off a kit from Stranahan's Blue Peak Whiskey, along with a copy of 3-ingredient cocktails by Robert Simonson. Be sure to check out the special drink recipe that we provided in your virtual gift bag. I am on the clock, so I will be drinking water, but hopefully some of you made that whiskey cocktail. And our winner for the second raffle is Gabrielle Wenger. Congratulations to Gabrielle. There is one change I'd like to note for this evening's programming. Unfortunately, Sophie Kinsella is no longer able to participate. But now let's move forward, and we are thrilled to dive into our first panel for tonight, the romance panel featuring Mary Bly, Jackie Fraser, and Sara Jafari, moderated by Shyla Watson. I'm going to introduce them real quick, and we'll bring them out onto the stage and jump right in. Mary Bly is a New York Times bestselling author under the name Eloisa James and professor of English literature who lives with her family in New York, but can sometimes be found in Paris or Italy. She's the mother of two, and in particularly delicious irony for a romance writer, she is married to a genuine Italian knight. Oh, that sounds lovely. Jackie Fraser is a freelance editor and writer. She worked for AA Publishing, Watkins, The Good Food Guide, and various self-published writers of fiction, travel, and food guides, and self-help books. She reads a lot. No, really, in multiple genres, and is fascinated by the Bronze Age. She likes cats, vintage clothes, antique fairs, and photography. She currently lives in Hampshire, England. Sara Jafari is a London-based British-Iranian writer whose work has been longlisted for Spread the Word's Life Writing Prize and published in Galdem and the Good Journal. She's a contributor to I Will Not Be Erased and the romance anthology Who's Loving You. Jafari works as an editor and runs Token magazine, which showcases writing and artwork by underrepresented writers and artists. The Mismatch is her debut novel. Shyla Watson is a celebrity strategy manager and books editor at BuzzFeed. A native Los Angelino, she is a pop culture expert who loves all things books, TV, and movies, but especially those with happy endings. When she's not soaking up the sun and reading romance novels, you can hear her co-hosting the podcast BuzzFeed Daily. Take it away.
All right. Hi, everyone. I think we're going to wait until I see everyone's faces. Okay. Yay, we're all here. Thank you so much for that introduction. I am so excited to be here talking to Sara Jafari, author of The Mismatch, Jackie Fraser, author of The Bookshop of Second Chances, and Mary Bly, author of Lizzie and Dante. So to start, can you each share a very brief synopsis of your novels for those who might not be familiar? Sara, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure. The Mismatch is a coming-of-age love story that follows two women, Soraya in modern-day London and her mother Neda in 1970s Tehran. And it kind of explores kind of Soraya having her first love, and then you go back into her mother's life when she was also a similar age to Soraya, and kind of how she ended up moving from Iran to England. And it's kind of like a multi-generational love story.
I love that. Okay, Jackie, what about you?
So The Bookshop of Second Chances is a kind of midlife, starting again kind of story. It's about Thea, who finds out that she loses her job. She finds out that her husband has been sleeping with a friend of theirs. And also, because it's a book, so she's fortunate, she finds out that her great uncle has left her his house in the lowlands of Scotland, and his collection of books. So she goes up to Scotland to sort out the house, and decides that she might as well spend the summer up there, and she meets a grumpy bookshop owner, and shenanigans ensue.
I love it. Mary, what about you?
Mine is Lizzie and Dante. And Lizzie and Dante is, unlike people are talking in the chat about my romances, this is a love story as opposed to a romance. So it's got a lot of my own life in it. It's about a Shakespeare professor, and I'm a Shakespeare professor who goes to Elba, which is an island off the shore of Italy, where I've gone every summer for years with my husband, who's Italian, and she meets a chef, not grumpy like Jackie's, but a very sweet guy. And so it's a book that has interwoven with my own life all the way through, including a girl named Etta, who's based on my daughter Anna in a lot of ways. So it's a much more personal book than my
That's so sweet. Okay, so you each touched on this a little bit, but your books each have a very unique setting. Lizzie and Dante takes place on the Italian island of Elba, Bookshop of Second Chances in a small coastal town in Scotland, and The Mismatch primarily takes place in London, but also includes flashbacks in Iran. So how do each of these locations shape your character and affect their journey? Jackie, why don't we start with you?
Well, I always think I guess I was in the place in Scotland that the book is set pretty much when I started writing it.
Oh no.
Where I was interesting, so I liked elsewhere. And I do think, obviously, I think buildings are very important. I think my buildings are often characters in books, and the setting. When I wrote it, I had no idea what an impact the setting would have on other people, especially in the States, in fact. Because my partner is half Scottish. We go to Scotland a lot. I mean, it's nice, but I never think of it as being an exotic place particularly. But obviously, it's really struck a chord with my US readers. So yeah, it's kind of.
I mean, I can say that that's true. I'm based in LA, and when I read it, I was like, wow, this is so like cozy and cute. It was great. I was like, I need to visit. Mary, what about you?
Well, Elva's I just have to say that I read the bookshop of second. I want a shed in Scotland. I want my own shed. Although I would put electricity in it. I don't know about you, Charlotte, but
I definitely
for
would need that.
Americans, I was like, oh no, right? But I love that setting. Anyway, yeah, one of the challenges for me with this book was that all my romances are set in Regency period, and I've never been in a ballroom, and I've never met a duke. Woe is me. Anyway, I have been to Elba, so I wanted Elba to be a character in the book. So you'll see that I think it's a great sort of pandemic-y book, because I really wanted to make Elba the place, something you feel you've been to or you want to visit after reading it. So, you know, I included a lot of the parts that I love, like a fallen down abbey and Napoleon's house, which I just visited, you know, last week again. So yeah, in here, it's the idea that you go away from home, because the heroine leaves New York and she goes to this island and she has this unbelievable 6-week experience. So it's walking into a different world, and I needed the place to reflect that.
Yes, it's when I was reading it, I was like, wow, I've never been to Italy. So I was like, this is going to be one of the first places on my bucket list. Sara, what about you?
Yeah, setting was really important to my book too. I think in terms of showing the character, the main character, she's called Soroya. It's all about kind of her having like a double life in the book, and kind of like, I think it's set in London, where she's actually away from where her family live, shows like her life with her friends, and kind of her living a more liberal life, I would say. But then in going to the past and seeing her mum's life in Iran, I think you learn why her family are quite strict towards her, and why she has certain views towards sex. You can kind of understand it more when you go to Iran in the 1970s. But I also think the setting just provides good context for kind of, just like Soroya and like how she grew up and things like that. So yeah, the setting was quite important to me as well.
Yes, absolutely. So something that I love is that each of your protagonists are in a completely different age range. So Soroya just graduated university and is in her 20s, while Lizzie is in her 30s and Thea is in her 40s post-divorce. So why did you focus on this particular time in your character's life, and what about that age spoke to you as a writer? Sara, why don't we start with you?
So my book, starts with the character at 21 years old. And I kind of felt personally, like with the books that I was reading, there isn't much in the UK, at least actually, books kind of in that age range where like you've just graduated, so you are like an adult essentially, but I feel like it's a time in your life where you feel really like lost. And I think especially with my character, and I think it's quite relatable for, I think, a lot of kind of like people of color growing up actually, is that like she didn't really have much like much of a romance or like love life in her like teens, so it really is like in her like early adulthood that she kind of finds herself. So I thought that was quite an interesting time to kind of explore her having her first kind of like romance with a man, and kind of also, as well as that, kind of her finding her career and like everything. It's kind of a time where everything basically happens all at once, and I thought it'd be quite interesting to kind of explore. And also with her story starts when she's 21 in Iran, and just to see how different they are, but also how similar they are in these different time periods. I thought it was quite interesting.
Yeah, I loved that. It is very much like when you're thrust into the world post-graduation and everything, it's like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm looking for a job. I'm looking for a relationship. And, you know, she's never experienced these things before. It's not like you had a high school romance or had a high school job. It's like, it's all very brand new, which you really see her grow into that as you read. Jackie, what about you in your book?
Well, I suppose I guess quite a lot of romance novels, the protagonist tends to be maybe in her sort of late 20s. So just about thinking about maybe settling down, and so you can have a relationship that results in that it's a big, serious, maybe a lifelong relationship. And that's fine. Obviously, everyone has been 26, or they will be 26 at some point. But there are fewer books about women who are older. So when I started writing the bookshop, I was 44, which is how old Thea is in the book. And just thinking about my friends, you're always the same in your head. Like now I'm nearly 50, but obviously I feel the same as I did when I was 19 or 21 or 35. But things are different. You have different expectations, you have different responsibilities, and it can be quite frightening, I think, to feel that you need to start again. But that shouldn't put you off if you are in that position. You can still have adventures.
Yes, absolutely. There was a scene where he actually says that more than once. She talks about her age and how different things are for her, but she never thinks of herself as, in her head she's still in her 20s. And when I was reading, just in everyday life, I still think of myself as like 21, which I am not. But it's funny how we just envision ourselves and how that can really shape what we do in our everyday lives.
I mean, my mum said to me when I was at university, my mum said, oh, you're always 19. My mum got married when she was 19. She's like, well, you're always 19 in your head. And at the time, because I was that age, I just thought, surely you get to feel like a grown-up eventually. Oh my goodness. But no, she was right.
Oh, it's only in my body that I feel age, not in my mind.
Yeah.
Mary, what about you?
I'm so not 19. Feeling ancient. My character, Lizzie, has been diagnosed with cancer. And so, there's an experience I've had. And I wanted her to be in her 30s, because that's a time when it seems to me very few people are actually, actually get that diagnosis. It tends to be their, sort of young people get a lot of attention for it, or older people. And I wanted her to feel separate from life. So when the book starts, she's really she feels like she has no connection with people who are her own age. And through the book, she creates and finds a family, and, goes back and has, gets into treatment and gets to go back to Elba the next year and the year after and so on. But I think there's this shock. There's a shock of having a doctor say to you, the biopsy is positive. And I wanted that to put this book into a different place than a lot of the books I've read anyway, because mine exists in a, perfect present, like my characters live forever. But Lizzie knows she's not going to, and in some sense, we should all know that, 19 inside or not. This is a book which has, I hope, an awareness of the fact that we need to grab what time we have.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, no matter your age, 19, 30, 40s, you think that you have so much life ahead of you, but especially in your 30s, you're like, oh, I've got until my 70s, 80s, maybe even 90s, hopefully. And so, you change what you do thinking you have all of this time to achieve these things, to fall in love, to get married or have kids or whatever it is that you want to achieve. And when you're faced with reality and that time is cut short, you really have to change your behavior to get what you want in life. But you touched on this obviously just now, but while all of your stories are romances at heart, they each deal with darker issues as well, such as illness or addiction and infidelity. So can you each touch on some of the darker themes in your book and how you balance this with the love and the romance? Sara, why don't we go back to you?
Yeah. I think there are a lot of dark themes in the Mismatch. So like you were saying, there's like addiction. So I feel like I'm giving a spoiler, but I feel like I'll just give it. Someone in Saroya's family essentially is addicted to drugs. And I thought that was quite important in showing she has kind of like mental health issues as well. She deals with a lot of anxiety. So for me, it was quite important to kind of show like her family's backstory. and how it affects her, like how having someone in your family with addiction can actually affect a person, and the way that she acts, how she acts, and also that kind of affects her relationship with Magnus, like the main her like main love interest in the book, in that he, you know, he's a really nice guy, and he has his heart on his sleeve essentially towards her, like he's, you know, but it's her internal kind of struggles with like anxiety and like her family and their like hard past, I mean, is the reason why she can't just make it be an easy kind of love story for herself type thing. So I hope, yeah, there is darkness to it, but I think I kind of hopefully balance it with like her and Magnus dating and kind of her like friendships with her friends and kind of them doing fun things. So kind of hopefully it balances itself out.
Yes, no, I loved it. There's a scene where they're at a party and I was like, wow, parties, I don't remember what that's like. But it was really fun, and you definitely have those lighter moments. But I think, you know, with these relationships, like at such a young age, I feel like they might not always have so much depth to them, and they can be more frivolous or just fun or on the lighter side. So I really liked that you included those things, because it really added not necessarily a seriousness, but like a weight to their relationship, and just made their love feel stronger. Jackie, what about you?
Well, I think certainly I wanted Thea for the book to start with Thea being very unhappy. Generally the book's it's quite light, but I wanted her to have proper significant feelings, and for the romance that develops later on to feel as much, for the reader to feel as much joy and exuberance in that relationship as Thea does herself, because where she's come from has been it's sad when a long-term relationship goes wrong for whatever reason. You know, her ex-husband, he's not a bad person, he's a bit of a, you know, but he's not a bad person. He didn't set out to ruin her life, or because people don't, do they? Generally stuff happens as you go through your life. So that was kind of, I think when I really did feel like the book was a giant cauldron and I was throwing things into it, but I felt it was important for me that I cut the first chapter where Thea did a lot more crying. She cries quite a lot at the beginning.
Yeah.
but at the same time, you know, you go, well, that's, you know, when you've got a broken heart, it's tough, isn't it? So
yeah, and that really impacts her relationship moving forward, because you are used to like trusting someone, and then you realize that trust was broken, and so how do you let yourself trust in a new relationship? That takes a lot of growth. Mary, what about you? Well, obviously you mentioned the illness briefly, but I mean, how does, I guess, that illness impact the other characters in the book?
Well, Edda, who's 12 years old, is looking for a mother, right? And it was really fun for me to write character chapters from her point of view. And so there's a chapter in which she's so happy that Lizzie is going to marry her dad, and Lizzie has to tell her that she does have cancer. And that was a really hard chapter to write. I mean, it's a very hard thing to tell a child or to share with anyone. And I think I worked really hard to try to make this book uplifting rather than, you know, just like a tearjerker. And I think, I mean, I'm getting some calls from people saying you made me cry. but I wanted it to be, we hear these bad news, right? But we get through it, right? That's the great thing about love stories. I mean, I would say that all these books are love stories rather than romances, even though this is a romance panel. That's just because I'm a genre fiction writer and these don't fall into the category. I loved all of them, but they're not romances, because love stories do have these darker parts. They're more realistic. You know, the husband does, well, run off with your best friend. That was very, very not nice, but you know, bad things happen. And so I think the key is that a love story is uplifting and that you feel happy at the end. That you feel that even if there's tough things going on in your life, that this is a possibility for you. And that I think is the important thing.
Yeah. So I guess I'm wondering about each of your writing processes, because I mean, did you write these books during the height of the pandemic, or what, did you have these ideas floating around in your head beforehand? What is your process sort of like for writing these books, especially for Jackie and Sara, because I know these are your debuts. Sara, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, so I wrote it quite a while ago, so like before the pandemic, definitely. I think it was like 2017, 2018. So I wrote the first draft in about 6 months, and I spent years basically editing it. But my process was, I think, especially with like your debut, I've noticed it because I'm working on my second book now, and it's just a completely different process. But I think with like your debut book, or for me anyway, it had been kind of bubbling like around in my head for like years. Like I've been thinking about like what this book would be. I knew like key themes I wanted to explore within the book, and I love romances, definitely. And I worked at a romance publisher when I wrote the books. I feel like I was definitely inspired by like the things I was reading. But yeah, I kind of like knew definite themes that I wanted to explore, and it kind of came from wanting. There are certain like things in books that I feel like I never got to read growing up. I feel like there aren't that many British Iranian authors out there at the minute being published. So definitely growing up, I kind of felt like I wanted to read books about people having like Muslim guilt in relationships, or like things like that like I think are quite like specific, but you just don't see enough. So I kind of had these bubblings, and that kind of, yeah, that's where like the story kind of came from. But in terms of my process, I did writing workshops I found really helpful. So I had like a writing group with from like the Faber Academy, which is in London. And we kind of, yeah, workshopped each other's pieces of writing. I found that so helpful. So that was kind of how that began.
Absolutely. I mean, I know Sophie wasn't able to join us today, but in her book, the main characters are at a writing retreat, and it seems like a great place to be. Really helps with the creativity. Jackie, what about you?
Well, I guess I've been writing. I've written lots of books, but nobody was interested for a long time. So I started. I started writing the bookshop in 2016. And it was finished by the middle of 2017, and I didn't do anything with it for ages. So I belong to a critique group on Facebook. I've met some useful writing people on a forum, which has since closed down. But some of the women that I met there started a critique group. So several of my books have been through the critique group, and they'd always done okay. But when I thought, when I gave them the bookshop to read, that because it's a women's fiction group, it's not a romance group, and they are not, yeah, so I was like, oh well, they just say, oh, it's a bit, there's it's a bit too, does it have to have a lord in it, come on. But actually I got the best feedback that I'd ever had for any of my stuff from them, so that was really encouraging. And then I like Sara, I did like 1,000 drafts, and I was happy with it. I felt like it was good, and I also, this is maybe perverse, I read it myself recently. I read the paperback, and I just like, well, I really like it. I really enjoyed it, which is, yeah, it's quite perverse probably, but
No, that's great.
So I kind of felt as though, do I need to do anything with this? Maybe it's enough that it exists as a Word document in my computer. Do I need to go any further? And then Simon & Schuster, who are my UK publishers, they do a one day submission, and you don't have to have an agent. So I don't have an agent. So I submitted it to them, and I don't think I'd submitted it anywhere else. My other books I've submitted to agents, but not this one. And then they wanted to read the whole thing, so that was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then obviously everything in publishing is really slow, so it was 6 months or something before they then came back and said, oh, maybe we should have a meeting. So we had a meeting just before lockdown began. So it feels like it's a pandemic associated book, but it isn't really, because it's 5 years since I started writing it. But I write all the time, and I just and then I edit and revise, and and then eventually get to a point where I feel bold enough to let someone else read it.
I understand that all too well, being somewhat, shy with sharing my things with people. But Mary, this isn't your first book. You've written so many romances under Eloisa James. So how was this writing process different for you and sort of breaking out of that genre?
This was totally different for me because I'm an expert. You put me in a Regency or a Georgian ballroom, I know exactly where the exits are. I mean, I'm fine. So it took me 4.5 years to write. It didn't have a deadline for one thing, and I'm the chair of English at Fordham. So, I have my Shakespeare life is my real life, and then I write a book in the summer. But so this one had to fit into like little weekends here and there. But I wrote it, and then I took me a year, and I thought, well, this is just God's gift to, great Shakespeare professors who fall in love. And my agent was like, it's rubbish. And she ripped it apart. And then it took me another year, and I was like, now it really is like the best book about a Shakespeare professor falling in love that ever happened. And she was like, it's rubbish. So it was really hard for me to learn how to write about, for example, not just people in the contemporary moment, but also I have, her best friends are two gay men. Her friend Ruby is Black. It's a real challenge to learn how to write in different voices, right? And I had to learn a tremendous amount. And then I had a wonderful editor who I just want to give a shout out to here because it's Random House, it's Susan Campbell, who is absolutely brilliant editor of my previous book for Random House, Paris in Love, and then edited and loved Lizzie and Dante, and then unfortunately passed away from cancer. So I had to take her email with her last edits, and I had trouble visiting it after she died. But I did. And then it was inherited by the amazing Whitney Frick. So I finished Susan's edits, and then I got Whitney. So in some ways, this book it's my book, but it's also Susan's book, who told me how much she loved that Lizzie threw herself into life, even knowing she had a cancer diagnosis. It's Whitney's book, who spent so much time on the characters like Ruby and Gray and Rohan. It's also the book of the sensitivity readers who helped me. I hired a few before Random House came along. Random House hired some more, and from every single one of those people, I learned more and more about how to write in different voices that aren't my own. And I just want to give a final shout out to all of them, because this is one of those books that a community created.
Yes, well, I just want to ask one more question to just end everything. So all of your books, to some extent, are about reinvention, whether it's your character trying to figure out what to do with their life post-graduation, post-marriage, or post-diagnosis. So my final question is, do you think that reinventing themselves opened them up to love, or do you think that falling in love helped them reinvent themselves? Sara, you go ahead.
Well, that's a very interesting question. I think in my book, I think Soraya opening herself to love helped her reinvent herself. I think she was trying before, but she was always pushing against things, like kind of always in her head. I mean, I don't want to give things away, but essentially, I think Magnus helped her, find herself. But I think she would have found herself without him. But I think she would have found herself. It would have taken a lot longer, basically.
All right, Jackie, what about you?
I think one of the things that happens when you come out of a long relationship is that you might have forgotten who you are a bit, and that one of the things Thea has to do is she has to remember who she is. When she changes her name back to her maiden name, when she remembers what it is that she likes doing and the things she enjoys and how to be her. And also, I think she talks quite a lot about not being concerned about what other people think of her, and that's very freeing. That comes with being older, and that although the breakup of her marriage has knocked her confidence hugely, at the same time she does see that she has to see it as an opportunity to start again, and it's that kind of acknowledgement of her own self that enables her to look at Edward, who you might just think is, you know, he's quite irritable and irritating in some ways, but she sees that, she perceives that he is concealing himself, that he has things going on, but that he has potential, and because they make each other laugh, that's their in, if you like, but so her reinvention of herself allows her to find new love.
Mary, why don't we end with you?
My book has a thread in it which centers around a poem by James Wright, which has a line about being a chicken hawk circling, looking for home. And in my case, Lizzie is circling. She never settles on a branch. And so there's a truism, which is that songbirds only settle on branches when they're mating. They only sing when they're mating. So Lizzie begins to sing, which is one of her great talents. When she meets Dante, she really starts singing again. So in my case, it is a combination of meeting someone who is utterly accepting and loving and knowing who she is, and then realizing in that moment that she can sing. And so singing and love go together.
That is so sweet. Oh my gosh, I love that. I love that quote, and I cannot think of a better time to end it. Thank you all so much for talking to me about your amazing books. It was definitely an amazing time to read all of them for me, so I appreciate it.
Thank you all so much. And thank you to Shyla for moderating the panel. It was absolutely fantastic. What a way to start off tonight's evening, talking about love stories and reinvention and hard times. I think it's a culmination of everything that we've all experienced over the last 15 months. So what a great way to kick it off. I'm so excited to switch gears to more raffles. Our next raffle item is a Talbot's gift card, which will be a great excuse for refreshing that summer wardrobe. And along with that, we'll be sending out a copy of 9 Lives by Danielle Steele. Our winner for the Talbot's gift card raffle is Natalie Rodriguez. So congratulations, Natalie. Our fourth raffle for this evening is from Blue Sky Fibers Knitting Kit. After this warm summer, I am sure we will be ready for a cooler fall and winter. Not rushing the summer away, but just saying, getting in that mode is nice. We love getting cozy with our books, which is why we are delighted to raffle off the Holland Wrap Kit from Blue Sky Fibers and a copy of A Time for Mercy by John Grisham. And our winner for that raffle is Jenny Golani. So congratulations, Jenny. If you want to add some chills to your summer, you will love this next panel. See what I did there? Featuring Caroline Kepnes, Catharine Steadman, Laura McHugh, and Andrea Bartz. We are so excited to have Alex Segura moderating our mystery and thriller panel. So I'll introduce everybody. Caroline Kepnes is the author of You, Hidden Bodies, Providence, and numerous short stories. Her work has been translated into a multitude of languages and inspired a television series adaptation of You, currently on Netflix. Kepnes graduated from Brown University and previously worked as a pop culture journalist for Entertainment Weekly and a TV writer for Seventh Heaven and The Secret Life of the American Teenager. She grew up on Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and now lives in Los Angeles. Catharine Steadman is an actress and writer based in North London, UK. She is best known in the United States for her role as Mabel Lane Fox in Downton Abbey. Her debut novel, Something in the Water, was a Reese's Book Club and Hello Sunshine pick and a New York Times and Sunday Times bestseller. It was longlisted for the CWA John Creasy New Blood Dagger Award and shortlisted for the McCavity Award and the ITW Thriller Award for Best First Novel. And it has been optioned for film by Hello Sunshine, Reese Witherspoon's production company. Laura McHugh is the internationally best-selling author of The Weight of Blood, winner of an International Thriller Writers Award and a Killer Nashville Silver Falchion Award for Best First Novel. Arrowwood, an International Thriller Writers Award finalist for Best Novel, and The Wolf Once In. Her latest novel, What's Done in Darkness, was published on June 22nd, 2021. McHugh lives in Missouri with her husband and their daughters. Andrea Bartz is a Brooklyn-based journalist and author of The Lost Night and The Herd. Her work appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Marie Claire, Vogue, Cosmopolitan, Women's Health, Martha Stewart Living, Redbook, Elle, and many other outlets. And she's held editorial positions at Glamour, Psychology Today, and Self, among other publications. And for our moderator, Alex Segura is an acclaimed award-winning writer of novels, comic books, short stories, and podcasts. He's the author of Star Wars Poe Dameron, Freefall, the Pete Fernandez mystery series, and the upcoming Secret Identity, out by Flatiron Books. His short story, Red Zone, won the 2020 Anthony Award for Best Short Story. He has also written a number of comic books, most notably the superhero noir, The Black Ghost, the YA music series, The Archies, and the Archie Meets collection of crossovers. He is also co-creator, co-writer of The Lethal Lit, a crime YA podcast from iHeartRadio, which was named one of the best podcasts of 2018 by the New York Times. By day, he is the Senior Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Oni Press, with previous stints at Archie Comics and DC Comics. A Miami native, he lives in New York with his wife and children.
All right. Well, thank you, Katie, and thank you, Random House, for having us. I am super excited to be on this, to be moderating this panel, because I got to read all of your books, and it was ostensibly work, which was fantastic. But I want to let you all kind of speak to your new books, but avoid just, give us the elevator pitch, but also if you could share one thing that you haven't shared yet in an interview or a promotional opportunity, which is going to take a little thinking, but something new that ties into the book that you'd want to share while giving us the 101. Whoever wants to go first. I hate to be the teacher moderator. How about you, Laura?
Oh, I'll go.
Okay.
Hi, Alex. I'm excited to see you here.
I'm so happy to see so many friends. And
This is
Catherine, I'm
awesome.
happy to meet you. Now we're friends.
Yeah, so what's Done in Darkness? The main character is a 17-year-old girl, Sarah Beth, who her family belongs to this really strict, almost cult-like church in rural Arkansas. And when she's 17, she's abducted from their rural farm, and she's found alive a week later. And no one really believes her story of what happened to her. So the case goes unsolved, but the story really begins 5 years later when she gets a phone call from a highway patrolman, and he tells her he believes her story, but he also thinks her case is connected to the case of another girl who's recently gone missing, a girl very much like her. And he wants to kind of drag her back to the Ozarks to help him find this missing girl, which is the last thing she wants to do. So of course, she ends up going.
Awesome. Thank you so much. How about you, Andrea? Do you want to go next?
Sure. So my book that I'm talking about is called We Were Never Here. It's coming out August 3rd. And it is about two globe-trotting best friends who, on the trip of a lifetime in Chile, end up killing a backpacker in self-defense. And thinking of Amanda Knox, etc., they decide to ditch the body and fly home. What's especially terrifying and traumatizing is that this is not the first time that one of their trips has ended in bloodshed. So it's really a story both about, violence against women and women's safety while traveling. It's globetrotting. It takes place over a lot of different locations. But it's also the story of this sort of toxic friendship and these two women who are bound together by trauma, really trying to get at the heart of what happened and how did this happen. And you asked for something that no one's mentioned before. I don't know how interesting this is, but when I was writing the book, my working title for it was always The Visitors. And I think I liked the idea of like my books being The Lost Night, The Herd, and The Visitors. And then when it actually came time to settle on it, my editor pointed out that sort of sounded like the one
Sci-fi, yeah.
He's here somewhere. And it sounded, sort of like a sci-fi book. So we eventually ended up with We Were Never Here, which is a line in the book.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic title. And Laura, you got away without sharing your little factoid.
Gosh, I know. I didn't do that intentionally.
Okay.
Maybe part of it is, let's see, there's some really creepy spider scenes in the book. And my greatest phobia really is spiders. And there's a scene with tarantulas in the book that really happened in real life. And I've been forever traumatized. So if you ever want to scare me, just, text
Send
me
you pictures of
a
tarantulas
or something.
All right, duly noted. We'll see how the panel goes. Caroline, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I've never been good at the elevator pitch, but it's You Love Me. My latest book, I'll pretend to hold, is a Joe Goldberg book. And it's basically, he's kind of a city person and he moves to an island. Oh, look at that. Thank you. And he's he's not necessarily trying to be a good person, but he's cornered. So he has to abide certain laws that in the past he would have more casually broken. And he meets these people, of course, a woman, a librarian, and these people on the surface all get along very well and they're all very good people. But when he gets to know them, he finds out a lot of secrets. And it's that, like, if he never showed up, they would have gone on the rest of their lives, but he does. So yeah.
Yeah,
And
he's
one
very
thing
much a
that-
disrupting factor.
Yes, yes. And let's see, there's a part of the book that involves the game Centipede. And when I was growing up, it was like the most luxurious item that we had in our house, this tabletop sit-down centipede. And I was kind of stuck on the book and tried to write a scene and couldn't find it. And then I was like, oh my God, centipede. And we don't have it anymore. But I never think of myself as a video game person. And you know how when you look back in your life, you sometimes forget things. And I'm like, oh my God, I play that all the time. I know the language of it. And it kind of clicked together for me. And that was an exciting writing moment.
Oh yeah, like these little detours that don't really fit with your persona, I guess. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yes.
Catherine, what about you?
Good segue, because my other job obviously is being an actor, and Disappearing Act is set during pilot season in LA. Pilot season.
I had your book at the ready just in case too.
Okay. Yeah, pilot season in LA is when all the actors from all over the world, they sort of descend on LA, which I know Caroline knows all about. And they are all auditioning for all of the TV shows that are going to be going into production that year. So it's kind of like a bun fight over there for who gets what roles. And my main character is a British actress, and she travels over to LA for pilot season off the back of having done a kind of period drama in England. And so she has a little bit of success. She rocks up to an audition, and yeah, I've not given this bit away, I don't think, in any, it's not a spoiler, but basically when you go to an audition, you only go to an audition if you match the character breakdown. So it will say 30s, white, brunette, and then, like, I don't know, veterinarian, doctor, who has a penchant for classical music. So you'll go in and everyone in the room will be white, brunette. They'll all look like you. They'll all be the same height as you. They'll all be dressed like someone who likes classical music. Some of them will be in scrubs. And I love the idea of trying to differentiate all of those people in the room. And if someone went missing, would you be able to, in all honesty, say you could tell the difference between them and someone else? And I kind of play with that in the book.
Oh yeah, that's a lot of fun. Wow. So I have special individual questions for each of you, and then some general ones that we can get to if we have time. But Andrea, I'm going to start with you. I'd love to just hear more about. You talked a little bit about the plot and the details, some details that you hadn't shared, but I'd love to hear more about the idea behind We Were Never Here. You know, there's this idea, you know, the perils of female friendship, but I feel like your book pushes back on that in a really smart way. I don't mean to presume too much, but I'd love to hear you talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's been interesting now that, you know, arcs are out in the world. A lot of people ask about, oh, is this a book about the perils of female friendship? And I kind of say, well, I thought I wrote a book that was about the perils of being a woman, which is different, and we still have to kind of pit these women together. So I really had the idea. I'm a travel writer in addition to being a novelist, you know, now I'm a grounded travel writer, but I was always just hearing from people like, oh gosh, you went there by yourself. You're so brave. You should be careful. I would never go there. I wouldn't let my dog go there. And I took a trip with a friend to Chile's Elqui Valley, which is where this beginning of this book takes place. And it was so empty there that we pretty quickly, my friend and I, befriended the one other backpacker in town, and he was this really awesome Australian guy named Stephen, and the three of us immediately were like old friends, and just pretty much inseparable until it was time to leave. And he was so not creepy that we pretty quickly jumped on a running gag about how he was actually out to like kill us and steal our money and run away. He was so great that we could just keep making jokes about that. And it was our last night, and we were drinking Chilean wine in our hotel suite and just hanging out like we've been doing the whole time. And yet again, somebody made a joke about how Stephen was really just playing the long game to kill us. And because I'm a thriller writer and this is how my brain works, I just kind of turned and said, Stephen, you've known us exactly as long as we've known you. And you actually didn't see me pour your wine in the kitchen. So what makes you so convinced that like we need to be afraid of you? And we all just kind of sat with that quietly. And he, in his Australian accent, was like, well, I guess it out now.
Single tear.
And that was when it turned into a horror movie. No, but that was where the idea for this book was born of like, what would a situation be where women who are just constantly sort of these receptacles of violence find themselves dishing it back. And so the whole sort of story grew out of that little hook, and I started writing without any idea where it would go. And so it is a friendship story, but I also think of it very much as a story that sort of turns on its head the knee-jerk assumption that women are always the ones who should be afraid, and that women are always going to be the victims, but never the perpetrators.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I love that. I love how you flip that kind of preconceived notion. And Carolyn, I wanted to talk a little bit about Joe, who we mentioned a little bit, and I found him to be such a fascinating character. And I just, as a writer reading the book, I was like, how does she do this? How does she nuance this character who has this? I felt like he had a disconnect. He wasn't really, he was doing these things, but not necessarily aware of whether they were good or bad or the effect he was having on people. And I just want to hear more from you about just kind of creating this person and how as a writer you fully flesh these kind of characters out.
Yeah, well, for me, like, he's really, really sensitive. Like, that's one of those things with the first book. I thought we all say, oh, like a sensitive man, what could be better? But we forget that for anyone, if you're too sensitive, and he gets into that hero complex. So I feel like in that first draft, I'm like knowing who I want to die or who the enemy is. But I love like getting to know characters and knowing why this person in particular would get under his skin. Like, it's not just that it's part of it is selfish. Like, he's basically jealous of Phil because he has a wife and he has a certain kind of success and access to the machine and, fans. And I like combining that like kind of human, awful narcissism with his also genuine concern for the other people. Because I like the mess of that where like, for me, like I'm writing and hopefully you're reading and you're like, like this, like anyone, these people are good and bad, but he's reminding us of what he's doing in a protective way and using that to get away with playing God and murder. And something I was like dealing with today, I'm working on the next one now. And I like realizing like in that moment when I feel myself turn over and join his side as he's mentioning things that this character did that I forgot about in the moment of the heat. And I'm like, oh my God, like, yes, like this guy's gonna die. And I have that sick feeling after, and then I come back to myself and I'm like, oh my God, no, Yeah.
I guess that's when it's working, when it becomes that intense, the emotional roller coaster.
Yeah. And that's when it's not working. Like, this scene is one of those things I feel like for a while, it's my second draft and I'm like, come on. And today was a nice, like, oh yes. Like,
yeah.
the worst parts about this person are now here and accentuated in that way that someone convincing and manipulative can do, where they can bring you over to their side as if they've never done anything wrong.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic when stuff clicks together like that. Catharine, The Disappearing Act is, if I'm not mistaken, your first thriller set in Hollywood. And obviously you're an actress too. And so did you want to avoid that at first, or was it something that you felt really fit for this book? And, what was it like exploring that world as a thriller and, kind of the parallels with your own life, but also keeping things separate?
Yeah, it was really fun. I kind of wanted it to be escapist. I mean, I could have set the whole thing in London. We have auditions here, but LA's got that special kind of sparkle to it. But yeah, it's one of those places I feel it very misunderstood, especially for outsiders. I'm sure it's very different if you live there, but for an outsider, you really do have this image of the place, and when you get there, it's both a letdown and much more impressive than you thought it would be. At the same time, it's a very confusing atmosphere.
That's
and
interesting.
The kind of the location as well is pilot season as a circumstance, because it's such a particular thing. It really is. it's kind of like, I suppose it's a bit like an Agatha Christie drama in that instead of going to a country house, they go to LA. So it's lots of very strange strangers going to LA, which is the country house where, you know, the mystery happens. But I don't know why it took me so long to get around to, I guess it was sort of my day job. So like I was trying to get away from my day job with this job.
Yeah, no, it took me 8 books to write about comic books as a noir. So it takes, sometimes we go around.
Exactly, yeah. But I thought, you know, I do have a lot of sort of insider. You forget, don't you? Like when you're in an industry, you forget that the little details are actually really interesting to people who aren't used to them every day. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there that I hope people go, oh my God, really? That's interesting. There's oh God, I don't know. Can I drop brand names? Is that allowed on this?
Sure.
There's this thing which is quite
Brought
funny.
to you by.
If I say it, you'll see it. But if you look at Instagram, if you look at any kind of up and coming young actors Instagram, you might notice them standing against an Audi, because every time an actor goes to LA, Audi tend to give him a car. But it's quite funny when you're just scrolling through and you go, Audi. So yeah, there's lots of like little nuggets there, and the competitive atmosphere of LA during pilot season is just rife for thriller stuff.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. The Audi thing now, it's kind of recalibrated how I look at Instagram, at least for LA based people. But yeah, I think readers want to be immersed in a world, and those little details really help do that. And I think setting is also a really big part of having a reader feel grounded and engaged. And Laura, you do that so well with your books. And I'd love to just talk about the Midwest as a setting, and some of the challenges that come with I guess I want to say challenging preconceived notions that people have, and also being true to your own experiences living there.
Yeah, I've set all of my books so far in the Midwest somewhere, either in the Ozarks, Northern Arkansas, Southern Missouri. And I remember when The Weight of Blood came out and someone accused me of like ruining tourism for the Ozarks or something like
It's your responsibility that people come.
I think Gillian Flynn and Daniel Woodrell helped with that, before I got there. But no, it's a place that I love. It's a place that's home, but there is so much to it that's kind of fascinating to me that I like to explore through crime novels. And part of it is people will get upset by the portrayal of the area for various reasons. And I've seen people, watching the show Ozark, and they get very upset. They're saying, well, they're portraying us as a bunch of hillbillies or this and that. And like with my books, I had someone literally scream at me at a book club meeting one time, which was kind of horrifying, but she was very angry and accusing me of, making us all look bad, like everyone in Missouri or something. And it was really interesting to me, for one thing, because part of the story was inspired by a true crime that took place in the Ozarks in a very small town where I lived. And the real crime was much more horrific, even than what I ended up writing in the book. So I think also a lot of it is many of these shows and books set in the Ozarks, including mine, they're crime-based. And so naturally we're looking at, the creepy underbelly of this place, and we're looking at all the bad people and these horrific crimes. And I mean, it might be hard to get a really good impression of a place when it's a crime story, you know what I mean? But there's good and bad everywhere in every setting, and anywhere that you set a crime novel, you're going to have that. But yeah, it's interesting for me to go to book clubs and go different places and talk about the book. And there are some preconceptions about this area and what it's like. And honestly, some of it is correct. And that's just a fact. There's a lot of poverty, there's a lot of drugs, a lot of horrible crimes. Most of my work is inspired by real crimes that are set in the area. So for me, it's just kind of balancing, I'm writing about real things that happen that are terrible, but I'm also kind of infusing it, I think, with like a love of place. A place is home. You don't have to love everything about home, but there are certain things about it, that mean something to you. And so I kind of try to balance that, the dark and the light. And, I write about family and how important that is in these small towns and these intimate connections where everyone knows everyone else and these little communities. And I don't know. I'm writing it as I see it. And, you know, if you like crime, I think you'll like it. But yeah, some people
For sure.
are a little disturbed that it's so dark, you know, and it's their home and it's dark, but you know.
It is a crime novel.
Yeah, it's a crime novel. All my work is going to be dark and creepy.
Yeah, it's you know, you're kind of starting from a certain point, but I think also readers want they don't want the generic setting. You know, they don't want, you know, the traveler's guide. They want the cool the you know, the view from someone who's been there and spent a lot of time there, which I got from all of the books while I was reading them. This is a question for everyone. You know, Andrea talked about this a little bit, and Laura, you talked about, you know, basing some of your books on true crime. But, you know, where do you all pull for inspiration? You know, obviously I've heard a little bit about your own experiences that kind of come through in your books, but how do you make sure it diverges from that initial spark and get it into the shape that you want as a book? Like Andrea, you talked a little bit about a trip. That trip was kind of the spark for the book, but what's the process like then for you? Do you dive into research? Like what's the journey after that initial idea? And anyone can answer.
Yeah, I mean, in my case, I guess I'll start since I led into this last time, but I'm a pantser, which is not a plotter. So I write without an outline, and it's a terrible way to write thrillers. I hope I'm the only one of us who does it that way.
I have a theory that there's a silent majority that does both. That's somewhere in the middle, but I'll keep that to myself.
Plantsers, I heard that term recently.
Yeah, plantsers.
Somewhere in between. But no, I just start with a hook and I sort of discover the story by writing the first draft. And it's exciting because like twists and turns come out of nowhere and surprise me. I mean, Caroline was kind of talking about that spark of like, whoa. But it's also terrifying because especially when you're, you know, in the second half of the novel and you're trying to land all the planes that you launched up into the air in the first half, there's a lot of laying in bed at night and staring at the ceiling and just wondering, like, is this ever going to come together or do I need to scrap the entire thing? So for me, it's like getting a hook that I'm really excited about, and then other elements just kind of get introduced the moment they appear on stage as I'm writing them. And then there's, you know, lots of stuff my subconscious sort of plants in the first half that ends up paying off or becoming useful later.
I mean, I salute all pantsers. I think it's amazing. And I used to try, every time I try to do that, I end up just outlining, except I've started half the novel already. So
you probably still wasted a lot less time than I have. So no
yeah, everyone's whatever works, I guess.
Like there's no way around the wasting of the time, right? And the hundreds of pages to get a few pages, like.
Yeah. What about you, Caroline? Are you usually inspired by a specific story, or, you know, once you have that initial spark, and I know you're writing a series, so that's kind of, you've got a framework already, but.
Sort of. I mean, I wrote the first two books together, like in one breath. You know, as soon as when I was writing the first one, I was like, I want to do another. And so I wrote it right away. So this was my first time writing in a few years, this character, and since the show was on. And in the interim, I became obsessed with Cedar Cove. And I was watching it, like when I love something, like Annie knows this, like I watch things over and over and over and over again. Yeah. And then I get mad at myself and like beat myself up. And I was like, that's it. Like I'm sending Joe to Cedar Cove. And then I can rationalize
it's research.
All of the hours that I spent like memorizing whole episodes, you know? So then it's like, I feel like the one thing I've learned from trying to write books before finding that way to write a book that got published was that I have to be obsessed with it. And if I'm obsessed with it, I'll finish it. I'll work on it. I'll feel good. Like, I feel like it's important to have those parts that you feel like, oh, this is only for me. And everyone might think I'm crazy. And then it's scary to like, I'm also relate to Annie. I'm scared of everything. So when I was like, I always expect to, you know, someone's up to something or going to die. We're probably all a little bit that way. So when I went to Bainbridge Island, like that was part of the appeal. Like there's just no murder there. And everywhere I went, and this very nice younger person is like showing me around the island. I'm like, you come here by yourself? Like, and no one's ever been killed and no one's dumping bodies here on a regular basis. This is amazing. And yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that you mentioned obsession because that's so true. Like if I don't do research, I'll just read. If I'm obsessing over something, that's what will make the next book. But yes. I'm not good with homework. And I think the obsession kind of shows on the page, and that kind of pulls in the readers. Totally.
And you think about the homework that you did like when you were growing up and the stuff that your mom was like, put that down, like that's your, you know.
Yeah, it was probably like whatever I was reading in English class, whatever the assignment was. How about you, Catharine?
Yeah, I don't do a lot of outlining. I sort of have I start with the hook, and then I sort of go for location and theme. And I kind of know where it's going, but I don't sort of decide until right at the end, because I like to make all the alternative whodunits real enough that it could be that, and then at the end I can sort of decide who done it at the same time as the reader can decide it, hopefully. Yeah, and in terms of this, like, it's that thing of like being a little bit obsessed with the idea of I really want everyone who reads it to feel like they've done a pilot season. I feel like I've got this information and I need to like onto people, and and add this kind of, I don't know, you might disagree, Caroline, because I know you live in LA, don't you?
Sometimes
Yeah.
half of me. I loved your book.
Oh,
I'll just say that, like, I was like, yes.
It has
like
this kind of like creepy Lynchian vibe to it, especially when you go up in the hills at night and there's no barriers on the side of the road, and
It's terrifying.
if you
right, it's and to think of people doing that and before cell phones for so many years, like
no,
it's
just
weird.
on the phone, directions on the phone or a map, like
Yeah.
it's terrifying.
There are so many
And when you
streets I
drive
don't go
past
on for that reason. Yeah, I'm like, no, 2 cars don't fit here. Like they don't.
It's just not
So-
meant to be. Yeah.
Yeah. And you drive past these weird houses, you know, that you'll drive past one house and it will be built like a kind of Swiss chalet, like a 5-story Swiss chalet. And then you'll go around a bend and it will be just like a glass building. It's like there's no central planning at all involved in anything. It's just people going, let's build a hut, let's build a yurt.
Yeah.
So yeah, it has like this innate strangeness. I just wanted to get that across. It sort of lends itself to a thriller, so that sort of weaved its way into it. But yeah, I mean, as a place, LA it's beautiful, but it's creepy.
Yeah, I think the duality, you know, that contrast of paradise and seedy underbelly is really powerful.
Yeah.
Laura, I didn't forget you.
Hi. Yeah, I'm a pantser too, although I'm getting a little more structural as I go with each book up front. But I often start, you know,
Join us, become a plantser.
I'm trying really hard.
One of us.
But I usually start with like one detail from a true crime that has really intrigued me. And from this most recent one, with What's Done in Darkness, there was a case in California, this woman named Sherry Papini who disappeared while she was jogging. Any of you remember that? And she was missing for about a month. And then on Thanksgiving Day, she was found at the side of the road, like chains wrapped around her. And she's all, you know, in this terrible shape. And she's like running along the interstate or something. And she'd been gone for about a month. And I remember they were trying to figure out what happened to her. And her story was both kind of vague. And then the details seemed, you know, a little bit sketchy. And what was really interesting to me that I took from all of that were a couple of things, like one, women not being believed. For one, you know, if you come back alive, you're going to be questioned, you know, they're going to think you did this yourself, or they won't believe you. They want to know why you can't help solve this yourself. And so that was part of that detail. But the other part, I just kept thinking, what did happen to her? And maybe there's a reason she can't tell us or does not want to tell us what happened. And I just could not stop thinking about what happened during this time. And so Sarah Beth in the book, she's missing for about a week and she's kept in the dark, and the person never says a word and she never sees anything. She's blindfolded, it's dark. So she doesn't know who did it. She doesn't really have any clues to help them. And so when she comes back, she's doubted and they're not really sure, you know, what to think. And so that was the part that I took and kind of ran with for the story.
Yeah, no, it worked out really well. And I was the same when I was writing the Pete stories, each one had at least some kind of true crime inspiration. And that goes back to what we were talking about before with obsessions and just immersing yourself in something and it becomes a book. We're about out of time, but I would like to thank you all for being awesome panelists. And I loved getting your books and reading them and being able to talk about them with you. But before we go, I want each of you to, you know, just plug something you're reading or plug an author that you've been enjoying. It's something I love to do just to kind of spread the love a little bit. But if there's any book that you've been reading that's been really compelling, let us know about it.
One that I recently loved, it came out about a year ago, was Leah Conan's All the Broken People.
Oh, yeah.
Domestic suspense. It's just really well crafted and tense and great.
One that I'm really excited about, I blurbed it and I love this book and I love the author. It's The Missing Hours by Julia Dahl.
Oh yeah.
And it's coming out in September. And it's kind of about, sexual assault in the digital age. It's very intense. It's very good. And I love all of her books. So I would highly recommend her.
She's great.
Mhm.
Lindsay Cameron's Just One Look is coming out, and I read that last summer and gave it, when you see your blurbs and you're like, oh God, like calm down. I love the show Enlightened, and to me it was like enlightened but a thriller, and yeah, so dark, but also had that Californian digital aspect of the story. I don't think it's California, but Lindsay Cameron, Just One Look, I think next
Yeah,
week.
no, I need to check it out. That's great. What about you, Catherine?
I've totally forgotten the author's name. That's really, really bad. Sorry. But it's When We Cease to Understand the World. I don't know if anyone's read it, but it's mind blowing. It's if you like factoids, this book is amazing. It's a mix of non-fiction and fiction about all of the greatest discoveries, basically, of the 20th century, the atom bomb, how mathematicians discovered like quantum theory and stuff, but it's all sort of like weaved in kind of magical realism. So you get to see like their home lives a bit, and yeah, it's just brilliant. It's really good.
That sounds fantastic. Well, thanks everyone. This was a fantastic panel too. I loved hearing you all talk about your books, and I hope to see you all in real life at some point soon.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alex, and everyone.
Thank you so much, everybody. That was so much fun. So creepy. I am like freaking out a little bit, but I hope you all read their books and enjoy them. Okay, so switching gears to raffles. Our fifth raffle of tonight is by our tea partner. Not much is better than enjoying a great cup of tea while reading your favorite book, which is why we are excited to be partnering with Block for our next raffle. Block is giving away its afternoon collection, which includes 2 of their most requested blends to go along with a copy of Bestiary by K-Ming Chang. And the winner of this raffle is Tamara Way. So congratulations, Tamara. Our sixth raffle is the Sweet Heat Collection by Trade Street Jam Company, which will be perfect for readers looking to add some spice to their reading snacks. This collection includes Trade Street's beloved strawberry chipotle and fig jam, the cherry chipotle mocktail elixir, and the newly released raspberry hot sauce. And the winner will be sent Detransition Baby by Tori Peters. And congratulations to Christy Appleby for winning this raffle. Okay, so now on to our next session on literary fiction. Pik-Shuen Fung, Violet Kupersmith, Maurice Carlos Ruffin, and Anuk Arudpragasm will now be discussing their latest books with Saya Rankin. So Pik-Shuen Fung was born in Hong Kong and grew up in Vancouver, Canada. She is a Kundiman Fiction Fellow, a Kundiman Mentorship Lab Fellow, and a Margins Fellow at the Asian American Writers Workshop. She has been awarded residences at the Millet Colony and the Story Knife, and her writing has appeared in the Margins and Rice Paper magazine. She holds an MFA in Fine Art from the School of Visual Arts and a BA in Visual Art from Brown University. Her artwork has been exhibited at the Newark Museum, the Katona Museum, the Secret Theater, and Beverly's. Violet Kupersmith is the author of the short story collection, The Frangipani Hotel. She previously taught English with Fulbright program in the Mekong Delta and was a creative writing fellow at the University of East Anglia. She has lived in Dalat and Saigon in Vietnam and currently resides in the United States. Maurice Carlos Ruffin is the author of We Cast a Shadow, which was a finalist for the PEN Faulkner Award, the PEN Open Book Award, and the Dayton Literary Peace Prize, and longlisted for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize and International Dublin Literary Award. A recipient of an Iowa Review Award in Fiction, he has been published in the Virginia Quarterly Review, AGNI, the Kenyon Review, the Massachusetts Review, and Unfathomable City, a New Orleans Atlas. A native of New Orleans, he is a graduate of the University of New Orleans Creative Writing Workshop and a member of the Podunk Writers Alliance. Anuk Arudpragasm was born and raised in Colombo, Sri Lanka. He spent most of his 20s studying in the United States, eventually receiving a doctorate in philosophy at Columbia University. His first novel, The Story of a Brief Marriage, was translated into 7 languages, won the DSC Prize for South Asian Literature, and was shortlisted for the Dylan Thomas Prize. He currently lives between India and Sri Lanka. Saya Rankin is the books editor at Entertainment Weekly, where she oversees coverage of everything from literary fiction to celebrity memoirs, while constantly searching for extra hours in the day to read. Thank you all so much for being here, and take it away.
Hi, everyone. Hello. Oh my gosh, Anuk, I think you might win for the best bookshelves that I've seen in panels lately. That was like the first thing that struck my mind when you popped on screen. I just had to say it before we started.
These are actually not my books.
I put you on blast. Well, welcome everybody. I would love if you guys could everyone can go around and give us kind of the elevator pitch for your book, kind of in your own words, how you're explaining what your book is about. And let's see, I'm gonna start with Maurice because you're the closest to me on my little round robin of the cameras.
Thank you so much. Hello everybody, I'm glad to see you here tonight. And my shirt is full of stars, even though it's flowers in real life. I'm not sure what that's about, but I like it. So I have 2 books to talk about. This is my first book, We Cast a Shadow. This came out in paperback last year. And this book is basically about a mixed race family facing racism in the future New Orleans. And so many who read the book said that it sort of gave them a primer for a lot of things that happened in America last year, including George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and other events like Breonna Taylor as well. My book that comes out in about a month is called The Ones Who Don't Say They Love You. And this book is like some short stories. And the stories are about my hometown. There are 19 stories in it. All of the characters are New Orleans people. And what makes it, I think, kind of unique is that, New Orleans is one of those cities that people sort of think they know. It's a world city, like a Paris or a New York. But my intention was to sort of give you a behind the scenes look at the city. Tourist cities like Orlando or Las Vegas have a sort of shine that people can see at a distance. But when you sort of get into town, you might hope that you could actually like go to somebody's house, see what their lives are really like, maybe go for a walk in the park with them. Well, in the book, I have this diverse array of characters, again, 19 stories, who range from as young as 13 years old to as old as 60 or so. And the idea was sort of fill in a gap that I saw in literature. What I noticed is that even though New Orleans has a pretty big footprint in terms of music and in terms of, we have rappers, we have food, we have those kind of things, but there aren't that many African-American writers coming out of my city. So I want to just sort of create something that would show who we really are and be an inspiration to other writers in the city who are trying to get their stories out to the world as well.
Oh. Violet, do you want to go next to your next one?
Sure. Build Your House Around My Body is my novel. It is about 2 disappearances in Vietnam, one in 2011 and one in 1986, and about a sort of spider web of characters that all have something to do with these 2 women who vanish in some way. It concerns like a team of Saigonese Ghostbusters and also a school for mixed race children during World War II set in the Central Highlands. And there's also a haunted rubber plantation. And a corrupt policeman who has a cobra problem. It's sort of slippery in terms of genre. It's inspired by a lot of folklore. There's tons of ghosts. I like to call it a kind of a haunted house of a book. Mm-hmm. But it's, yeah. But where the haunted house is, it's a book, but it's also Vietnam itself.
Wonderful. And Pik-Shuen, what about you?
My novel is called Ghost Forest, and it just came out yesterday. About a family that immigrates from Hong Kong to Vancouver, Canada in the 90s. And the narrator is the eldest daughter of the family. And after her father passes away, she turns to her grandmother and her mother to ask about their life stories. So it's a book about grief, but it's also a book about love within a family and joy and moments of absurd humor that we encounter even in difficult times.
Wonderful. And last but not least.
Hi, everyone. It's so lovely to be here. My book is called A Passage North, and it came out yesterday too, actually. And it's set in Sri Lanka in 2015, 6 years after the end of the 30-year civil war that ended in a lot of violence and a lot of bloodshed. And it starts in Colombo, which is the capital in the south of the country, far away from the war zone. And it revolves around the lives of three characters. The main character, Pik-Shuen, is the one from whose perspective the story is told. And he's a young Tamil man, a young member of the minority, who spent the last 2 or 3 years working in the Northeast in the former war zone, in rehabilitation work, in social work, and who returns to Colombo kind of defeated, with the sense that no kind of recovery is possible after all of the violence that was experienced during the war. And the other main character, or the second main character, is his grandmother, Appamma, who is this woman who's rapidly aging, who's losing her vision, who's losing her eyesight, who's losing her ability to move, her motor abilities, and who is slowly withdrawing from the world. And as she's receding from the world, she feels this really strong desire to in some way or the other participate in it, or if not participate, to at least be able to witness it. And if not the whole world, then at least the kind of small domestic space that she has access to. And the third character is Rani, who's a woman who's grown up in the Northeast in a small village and who lived through the 30 years of war and who lost both her sons in the fighting, and who's deeply traumatized, and who moves to Colombo to work as the grandmother's caretaker in the hope that it will, moving away from a home, will help her move away from her trauma. And she strikes this unexpected but intimate friendship with the grandmother. And so the novel starts when basically Pik-Shuen, the main character, receives a call from Rani's daughter, informing him that that she's passed away, that she's died falling into a well. And Pik-Shuen knows very well that there's a chance that it could be suicide, and he realizes that he has to go to the funeral. So the novel is just really following Pik-Shuen from the south of the country as he takes a long train journey to the north to attend the funeral of his grandmother's caretaker. And it's him in his mind thinking about the history of the country, his grandmother, Rani, their relationship, aging, and the passing of time.
One thing that really struck me kind of about all of the novels, and I think Violet, you kind of said it so well, that your book is Vietnam, essentially. And I did want to kind of ask everybody about the role of place in the book, partly in the way that like the place that your book is about is a reflection of you, like your relationship to that place and how that place kind of aids the novel. You know, Maurice, I think you mentioned that a little bit about New Orleans, but maybe Violet, if you want to start and kind of elaborate on what you meant about Vietnam.
Well, Vietnam is like a character in this novel. I mean, its history is at the center of the story, and it's sort of its role as kind of like this plaything for Western countries for so long. And like the land itself, a lot of the sort of revenge stories, they have to do with like the land trying to regain power. And I mean, my own relation to it, it's like a complicated love story for me. My mother's family is from Vietnam. They left in 1975 with the fall of Saigon. And it's kind of like an estranged motherland for me. And so the novel started when I moved back to Vietnam and grew out of my own exploration of what it meant to be Vietnamese American in Vietnam. and to not really feel like I belonged anywhere.
Sense. Maurice, did you want to talk a little bit about New Orleans from more than elaborating on what you said earlier?
Yeah, it's funny. Last week, somebody said there's something about New Orleans and trauma that goes together. It's like if you're from a place like New Orleans, you sort of can't avoid having that feeling. And I've been thinking about that for the past few days. Because it's a tourist city, people here, we can all sing, we can all dance, we can all play instruments. And yet this is a place that had Hurricane Katrina destroy us, essentially, in 2005. We have a history of the city burning down like 3 or 4 times in our past. Yellow fever was as bad here as it was anywhere else in America. And yet it's a place that other people come to sort of free themselves of their burdens. And you come to New Orleans because you want to have a good time. You want to go to Mardi Gras, go to Jazz Fest, have a party. And so I think in some ways my book, which features like hospitality workers, people that work in hotels, restaurants, it's kind of like, how do you respond to somebody asking you to make them happy when you yourself are not happy, or when you yourself are struggling to make money so that you can feed your family? So, on the one hand, the characters are all very resilient in this short story collection, but at the same time, you're getting to see inside of their heads and sort of understand, what does it mean to have that pressure on you the entire time that you're trying to cheer up visitors to your lovely hometown.
That's a wonderful I'll think about as we start traveling again in the future. Anuk, what about you? What is Sri Lanka? How does that aid the novel, and what's your relationship?
Well, it's kind of similar to Violet's in a way, because even though I grew up in Sri Lanka, I grew up in the south of Sri Lanka, and so we were cut off from like our ancestral homeland by the war. So I never got to see the part of the country that my parents and my grandparents, my great-grandparents are from until I was 21 or 22. And so for much of my life, this was a kind of like imagined landscape. I would see pictures of it. I would Google image search it. When Google had, when satellite view came into being, I spent a lot of time on that. I would hear stories from relatives about the village and the geography of the village and where they used to go and what road they used to take and where the temple was. And so I kind of, and I think a lot of, half of our community is diasporic. I think 1.5 million Tamils live outside the country because of the war. So many of us have imagined this landscape like very intricately, imagined it into kind of place in our minds. And so the sense I had when I first went to the Northeast was almost like I was walking on like virtual land in some way, something that was like a place that was in the outskirts of my mind in some sense. And there was this, I could recognize things that I'd never seen before because I'd seen pictures of them or because I'd been told of them. And so I think the book kind of also, the main character of the novel is also from Colombo and also has this kind of experience of his homeland. And so there's this tension between a virtual relationship to landscape and an experienced relationship to landscape throughout the book.
And Pik-Shuen, I feel like yours is kind of unique too, because you have the element of Hong Kong and of Canada in yours. So I'd love to hear you kind of talk about that.
Yeah, the family in my novel, after they immigrate to Vancouver, the father actually stays behind in Hong Kong because he's afraid that he won't find a good job in Canada. So it's actually this family that is living between Hong Kong and Vancouver at the same time. And he visits like once a year. And this was actually a really common setup between Hong Kong and Vancouver in the 90s. And they invented this term called the Astronaut Father for fathers that were always flying back and forth. So for me, I really wanted to create this feeling of rootlessness where this narrator whose parents are living across the ocean, like what does home mean if your family lives in 2 places at the same time? And yeah, it wasn't so much a book about place as much as a book about this feeling of like searching for home.
Makes sense. It's very clear in like reading everyone's bios the books and hearing you all speak about it, like kind of what the autobiographical elements of each of your books are, but I would be really curious to know like what is a part of any of your books that was very foreign to you in writing, something that was really different from your own experience, or that was kind of a struggle that you wrote like kind of out of yourself. And anyone who feels like they have a good answer is open for anyone who wants to go first.
I can start off on that one. So one of my goals, like I mentioned earlier, was that I wanted to write a book that represents my town. I can't do it all by myself, but at the same time, you know, in my own family, there's such diversity. I know people of, you know, different ages, different genders, different sexualities, different locations within the city, which have their own sort of vernacular. So for example, in the collection, you know, the final story is a novelette. It's about 40 pages long. And the main character in that story is a 45-year-old woman who's a Black lesbian. And I thought about that when I was writing this character, because the voice just kind of came to me. And, you know, I've never seen that woman depicted in anything. There's no other books out there that have somebody with that sort of profile. And so just thinking about people in my family who sort of fit into that box, if you will, and thinking, what would their story be like? And her story is about, you know, being a homeowner, you know, having, you know, a decent job, and yet still not quite being able to fight off gentrification. People want to buy your house from under you. They want to use the tax code to sort of get you out of your location and take it over for themselves. But she's fighting that. And also, the last story I wrote in the collection is called Rhinoceros, and that was actually set during the George Floyd protests here in New Orleans. So it's last June, you know, 2020. And the two main characters in that story, you know, one of them is a non-binary teenager, and the other one is the classmate who's a trans girl. And so in that story, it's very much about like engaging with a city like New Orleans, which is actually very queer friendly. We have an entire section in the French Quarter. We have big parades, that kind of thing. But at the same time, even within that community, they're their own sort of battles about identity and how you represent yourself in the world. So, you know, those are not my experiences, and yet I know those people, and I'm telling their stories to the best of my ability in the book.
Anyone else?
Do it. A lot of the book does kind of mirror my life. Like the protagonist is a mixed race Vietnamese woman who taught English, as did I at the same age. But the novel, there are a couple chapters where I dabbled for the first time in historical fiction. And I didn't think I was going to do this, but I started writing a chapter set in 1949 from the perspective of these French prison guards, these colonizers who were planting a rubber plantation. And it was kind of alarming how fast that came to that voice. And I was kind of disturbed by that. I'm a betrayer to my race. Why am I enjoying writing about these Frenchmen so much? But I do think there's something about kind of having that distance with the character that makes it come faster in some ways, or just like a more fun like body to inhabit briefly.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Pik-Shuen, I'm going to call on you next, and also point out if anyone read from the comments here that you did an amazing job reading the audiobook, which I now will have to check out as well.
That's Linda, who was the producer for my audio. Yeah, one of the threads in my book is about this Chinese woman painter from the Yuan dynasty, and she's actually considered as the most famous Chinese woman painter of ink painting of all time. But while I was researching her, I found out that actually only one of her works has been archived, whereas her husband, who was also kind of famous, but not considered like the most famous of all time, his works are collected all around the world. So that was one part of my novel where I did a lot of research and spent time looking at paintings online.
Anuk, did you have to do a lot of research? Obviously, yours has a lot of historical background that I would imagine was part of just your knowledge base from your life, but it's very thorough as well.
Thanks. Yeah, yeah, it is a lot. A lot of it is from my experience and just things I know. And I didn't do a lot of research in that sense. I think probably the scene that involved most work was this really like kind of elaborate funeral scene at a house, and then at a burning ground at a crematorium towards the end of the novel, where I really wanted to detail every single aspect of the ritual and to try to find a way to make it beautiful, and to also to explain or kind of understand all of these little things that are done in the course of a funeral that to somebody like me from an urban center don't quite seem natural or necessary, or don't quite have the kind of instinctive meaning that they might to have to somebody who grew up in a more rural environment. And so I spent a lot of time watching funerals on YouTube, actually. Funerals from people from this part of the world who just, for whatever reason, uploaded their funerals, and kind of trying to make sense of all the rituals. Yeah, that involved a lot of work, but that was not. Yeah, it was just watching videos and trying to understand. And I think in a lot of my in my writing, like I often if there's a question that I don't know, that question becomes a question in the consciousness of the character, from whose point of view things are unfolding. And so the question of what this is that that is being witnessed, what its nature is, how should I understand it, becomes part of, I guess, the drama of the narrator's consciousness. And so it doesn't matter really to me if I don't have like a kind of full epistemological access to what I'm talking about.
That makes perfect sense. I would imagine that you all, just knowing the timeline of when your books came out, are coming out, that everyone wrote these in the pandemic. And I'm curious kind of what your usual writing routines are, what your rituals were, and how that may have changed in the past year and a half, whether it was your different settings, alone, virtually, things like that. If anyone had a particularly a specific experience in that realm.
I can go. So I started writing my book in 2014, so it's been quite a few years, but I edited it during the pandemic. And in the beginning, I found it really hard to focus on anything. So I ended up creating this routine for myself where at around like 10 p.m. at night, I would put my phone on my bookshelf. And then I wouldn't look at it until after I woke up in the morning and I ate breakfast and stretched and did my editing for like 2 hours or something. I wouldn't look at it or read any emails or really talk to anyone.
That's a really good tip. And everyone says that's what you're supposed to do, but of course it's easier said than done. I admire that. Does anyone else what's everyone else's writing routines?
I can go. For me, the biggest, I guess, consequence of the pandemic of the various lockdowns for my writing was that it became impossible to pretend that people cared about what I was writing or that my writing mattered. I mean, it's in any kind of like historical situation like this, you feel the kind of insignificance or triviality or frivolousness of your work, or at least I have. And so it returned me to this space that I was in before I published my first novel, where I was only writing for myself, where like kind of the world as an audience kind of faded away, and it created this kind of more intimate relationship to my writing, where I'm writing because it matters to me. And in a way, I mean, there have also been many difficult periods, obviously, but in a way, I would say on the whole, it's helped a lot, or it's been nice.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know a lot of people work to get to that place where you have the imagined audience is no longer in your head. So it does seem to be the secret. Violet, what about you?
I had a very similar timeline, I guess, to Pik-Shuen. I started it in 2014, and then I turned in the novel body right as lockdown hit, right before. And I thought, like, oh, now I've been a hermit for so long. Time to go out and see everybody, because I've been hiding from you while and that really didn't happen. So so then I kind of descended like further into like solitary madness while I was editing the book. And I think the book itself is kind of like a many-limbed beast, and it was like a tricky thing to try and edit without just feeling like anxiety and like I was losing my mind. Also, I like to write at night between like 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. I don't know why that's when my creative juices flow. But so I just leaned into that and sort of chaos year. I embraced it. And I guess my only ritual was I like writing in yellow legal pads, longhand first, to try and like unlock something. But they're very horrifying to look at now. Like the stack of 12 notepads that chronicle the long and messy birth of this novel.
It's a relic. They'll have to put it in the pandemic museum one day.
I'm gonna burn them.
That can be a ritual that you do in and of itself, a big burning. And Maurice, we've just out of time, but what about you, your last up? Take us home.
Yeah, I do feel like, the pandemic has been complex for all of us. I think we all lost a few things and gained a few things. I do think with the book, it was a blessing for me because I mentioned that story about the two teenagers trying to get to the protest here in New Orleans. I couldn't have written that story if I wasn't on lockdown, in my house, getting texts from friends who were going to the actual protest, and they're talking about, gas is being shot at them by the police officers. I'm like, protect yourself, be safe. So a lot of that sort of narrative winds up in the stories, in the last story that I wrote. And then, the editing process for the book was entirely throughout the pandemic, and it really was a matter of, well, I really want to do this. So it gave me like a sort of refuge to not be thinking about what was happening in the world so much. I could sort of sit down and just really enjoy being in that space. And I actually finished my editing almost a little bit early, and I started my next book, which is my third book. I'm writing it now. And that solitude, the last thing I'll say is I was in Mississippi, staying in John Grisham's old mansion in Oxford. I was doing a residency up there. So I was there for 10 and a half months. And there was nobody around. Plus, there was a pandemic. There's ponds around me and forests around me, and that entire experience was very meditative. Like I think about, what kind of writer do I think I am? What do I want to write next? And so my next book is very much, again, trying to fill in blanks about sort of New Orleans, your New Orleans personal history. And again, without the pandemic, I couldn't have had that quietude to sort of find these projects at their best places.
Wonderful. Everyone, your books have been a refuge to everybody, and your books that have yet to come out will also be. So we're so thankful to you for writing them. And thank you guys so much for joining us on this panel. And everyone, I'm sure, who hasn't read looks forward to reading.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you all so much for joining us, and congratulations. I know we had 2 books come out this week, yesterday, so we're so thrilled that you were able to take the time to be here. And now we are moving on with our final raffle for this evening. We are doing one more gift from our favorite fairy tale brownies. I promise you these brownies are really delicious, and I know you hear about them all the time if you come to these events. So I'm so excited that we're pairing them with a copy of Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And the winner for the 6th and final raffle is Bambi Feaster. So congratulations to Bambi. And now for our last panel of the night. Our Hot Summer Read panel is moderated by Netta Dalal and features Lauren Weisberger, Beck Dorey-Stein, and Chuck Wendig. Lauren Weisberger is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of The Devil Wears Prada, which was published in 40 languages and made into a major motion picture starring Meryl Streep and Anne Hathaway. Currently, Elton John and producer Kevin McCollum are adapting The Devil Wears Prada for the stage. Weisberger's 6 other novels were all bestsellers, and her books have sold more than 13 million copies worldwide. A graduate of Cornell University, she lives in Connecticut with her husband and 2 children. Beck Dorey-Stein grew up in Narberth, Pennsylvania, and taught high school English for 3 years before serving as a White House stenographer from 2012 to 2017. Her first book, From the Corner of the Oval, was a New York Times bestseller. She now lives on the coast of Maine. Chuck Wendig is the New York Times bestselling author of Star Wars Aftermath, as well as the Miriam Black thrillers, the Atlanta Burns books, and Zeros, and Invasive, alongside other works across comics, games, film, and more. He was a finalist for the John W. Campbell Award for Best New Writer and an alum of the Sundance Screenwriters Lab, and he served as co-writer of the Emmy-nominated digital narrative Collapsus. He's also known for his popular blog, Terrible Minds, and books about writing such as Damn Fine Story. He lives in Pennsylvania with his family. Neda Dalal is Senior Marketing Associate for the Penguin Random House Speakers Bureau. She's also our PRH ambassador. A passionate lover of media, she is always looking for the next great read, watch, and listen. She loves talking about books and takes great pride in getting stories into the hands of as many readers as possible. You can find her on Instagram at the Bookish Persian and on Twitter at Neda Dalal. Take it away.
Yay, hello everyone. I'm so excited to be here. Hi Beck, hi Lauren, hi Chuck. This is so great. I'm excited to be moderating the final panel of the night on hot summer reads, which is personally my favorite kind of read. And as was just mentioned, my name's Neda. I can't wait to chat with these incredible authors. So to start off, I'd love for the audience to just get a sense of your books. So if you could please just give us the elevator pitch for your latest and greatest novel. And Lauren, why don't we start with you?
The elevator pitch. I love it. This book, this current book of mine, it's called Where the Grass is Green and the Girls Are Pretty, which you might recognize from a certain hair band of the 80s. Oh, Beck, thank you.
There we go.
I love it.
I'll just leave it right here.
Chuck, we're waiting.
It's in my mind.
I also don't have one, so but it is actually the story of 2 sisters who are very different but extremely close, and it is an exploration of where the line is, how far one may be willing to go to give their child every advantage, and it's a little bit ripped from the headlines of the college admission scandal.
Fascinating. Chuck, why don't you go next?
In my book, the Book of Accents, I do have the arc. There you go. You have the real deal. You have the big one. The Graves family moves back to the father's childhood home to get out of the city, and when they do, they find out that the father there is haunted by not only the trauma and abuse that happened to him in that house, but also the ghost of the person who gave him that trauma. And the mother also begins to experience her artwork coming alive. Her sculptures begin to gain life and in front of her. And their son, Oliver, begins to experience, he meets a new friend, and the friend seems to have some kind of dark magic. And it is unsure whether or not this friend is even a friend at all or who he is. And meanwhile, there's a haunted house that isn't a haunted house, and a coal mine, and a serial killer who's gone missing. And it's a lot of divergent weirdness converging on this poor family.
I love it. And Beck, go ahead.
Well, I'm hooked. Chuck, you got me. I'm terrified, but I'm hooked.
That's a goal. That's the
Yeah. And also, thank you everyone for coming. And I have to thank Lauren because she has really been my fairy godmother for 2 books now. She has been willing to blur both of my books, and Lauren, I just adore you. Thank you very much.
Only because they're amazing reads, both of them.
Thank you. Okay, my elevator pitch. It's about Rock the Boat. It's about 3 30-somethings who return home to their sleepy beachside town in New Jersey, and for one unforgettable summer. But the big thing is none of them are where they thought they would be. They had a checklist. They had, I think we all can relate to thinking we would be in a certain place at a certain point in our lives and realizing, oh, we haven't accomplished A, B, or C. How did this happen? And so it's kind of a reckoning with that. And also realizing, oh, there's no place like home and there's no place like friends who have known you your entire life.
Awesome. I forgot to hold up your book, Beck, but I do have it here as well. Fantastic. I have to say, I really enjoyed reading all of your books. They were all perfect summer reads to me. And since we're on the topic, and since this panel is about summer reads, I'm curious to hear from you all, what constitutes a summer read in your opinion? It's such a broad term, so I'm curious, should it have specific parameters? Can it be just any book that you read in the summer? Chuck, why don't you start us off?
When I was a kid, the ideal summer read for me was like, you know, I was one of those like, what a shocker. I was one of those pasty kids who didn't want to go to the beach, Jersey in our case. And we'd go and everyone would be like, it's ocean time. And I'd be like, I want to sit on the beach and read a book and under a tent and they'd like leave me alone. And the type of summer read that I really loved was the one that was like you could tune out the entire vacation experience and the vacation became the book. Like the book was really part and parcel of that experience. And, you know, you just, whether it's a hammock or a chair on the beach, it's just one of those things that feels like you can tune out the rest of the world. And it's literally the type of vacation you can have, whether or not you're somewhere else or whether you're in your own backyard.
That's great. Beck?
Yeah, I think just anything escapist. Chuck, it made me think of the Goosebumps series when you were like, what?
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect.
But really, and also just anything propulsive where you're just like, I have to know what happens next. But really just anything that kind of sets your heart on fire and makes you happy. That's what summer's all about.
Totally. And Lauren?
I mean, I have to agree with all of the above. You know, I think it's like that minute of reckoning when you're sitting there with the books. We all have like a pile on our desk we're always supposed to be reading, or that you think you should be reading, or that you want to read. But those are not the books that get packed in the bag when you're actually going to the place where you're like, I like you both said, just want to zone, not necessarily zone out, but like you want something compulsively page turning where you can completely lose yourself. And I don't think that's genre specific. I think that can be all different kinds of books, but they're definitively not the books that you should be reading or are trying to convince yourself to read. Those are squarely not summer reads.
Great answers all around. So I do have some specific questions about each of your books for you. So I'm going to start with Chuck. Your story is set in Pennsylvania, and you currently live in Pennsylvania, and you grew up in a haunted house in Pennsylvania, which I would love to hear more about. Is there something about the state that drew it to you as a setting for your book, and what was the inspiration you drew on there?
I mean, it's not just growing up here, but that obviously that's part of it, just because you're sort of like brining and pickling in the area in which you live. But there's something really interesting about Pennsylvania. Not only is it obviously one of the kind of earliest states, and it has such a fundamental part of, you know, history. And, you know, I always say that every house here is the house that George Washington slept in, or I was like, George Washington slept here. You're like, you can't have slept in all of these houses. Clearly had to have a cot somewhere. But there's so much folklore around here, and it's so much strange folklore. And once you kind of research it and you find out that sometimes it's braided into, you know, the history of the area, or sometimes the folklore is based on a bend of history. People got history wrong, or it's based on a kind of bigotry that was buried, whether it was Native bigotry or African-American bigotry from, you know, 100, 200 years ago. So it's just sort of a densely packed region with a lot of interesting things, plus cheesesteaks and pork roll, which is never a bad thing either. So it felt like a really good opportunity to scrape away some of those layers and kind of come up with my own folklore that's adjacent to where we are. So it's a little bit alternate reality. It's not quite exactly what you'd find around here, but it's recognizable. People I know who have read the book from Pennsylvania are like, isn't that this? And is this that? And I'm like, yes, it totally is. And I'm so excited when everyone finds those little Easter eggs and tidbits.
That's awesome. Lauren, so your book, Where the Grass is Green and the Girls Are Pretty, is mainly about two sisters, Skye and Peyton. Is the book inspired by your own relationship with your sister, and do you relate to one of them over another? Did you like was one of them more inspired by you or your sister or anything like that?
I love that question. Before I answer, I just want to give a shout out both to Beck and Chuck and to, we are all Pennsylvania people. What are the chances? But all three of us grew up in Pennsylvania. I'm just shouting out to Allentown and Scranton here. I don't know where you were, Chuck, but we see, I mean, love. Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's
kind of a random coincidence.
I think it must be the secret to like summer hot reads. You gotta get some Pennsylvania blood in there.
Everything goes back to PA. But you asked about sisters, and yes, this book is definitely inspired by my relationship with my own sister Dana. She's about 5 years younger, and I wouldn't say that either of us are based on either of the characters in the book. The two characters are named Peyton and Sky, and one is super ambitious, sophisticated, really, really bright. She's a morning news anchor, and the other is equally as sophisticated and bright, but also more of like a frustrated stay-at-home mom who wants to get back into the work world and isn't quite sure how to do it. Neither of those either personality or life descriptions fit my sister or myself, but the way that these two characters talk to each other and relate to each other is like an exact replica of our relationship. That's kind of what I wanted to convey, more than like, any one character trait, is like that brutality of sisters. At least my sister, who is brutal, and I love her to pieces, but I mean, there's no one else in my life anywhere close who would even ever dream of saying what she says, and vice versa. And it's just like this filterless, right there, right in it, truth at all costs. And that is the kind of like honest, no holds barred relationship that I was hoping to convey in the book.
I will say you succeeded. I have a sister who's my best friend, and I very much identified with the way they talk to each other, just going from very brutal to very kind and everything in between. So.
Oh, good. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
But I also, sorry to jump in, I also love the mom. How similar is that mom to your mom?
The mom is somewhat similar. She's more like, it's funny, like I wouldn't say she's so much based on my mom as like a lot of the moms of that generation. She's a lot like my husband's mom. She's a lot like my friends' moms, where she's again, like really bright and really sophisticated, and she'll travel the entire world on her own, literally alone, trailblazing. She'll go anywhere, but like can't work the Keurig, which is a very sort of familiar person in my life all the time. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Beck, okay, so I heard that a real life encounter with a plumber was the seed of inspiration for this book. And I'd love to hear more about that. Could you tell us more, please?
So speaking of moms, my mom has a really strict rule about not breaking spines on books. And so like that was just, I have bookmarks. I always have bookmarks. I will interrupt someone reading to make sure they have a bookmark. And so when I was actually still living in DC, I get a call from my mom being like, I'm not mad, but did you go to the family beach house and not tell me? And at the time I had a crazy job and was like, no, I didn't escape to New Jersey. And so it turns out that the plumber had been using the beach house as a little bit of like a crash pad situation. And we figured this out because there was a cracked book spine next to the bathtub. And the 5 Dorey-Steins know better than to ever leave a book face down with a broken spine. And so that was like the detective moment. So yeah, I thought in that moment, okay, really easy to just be like, oh, the plumber was using it as a crash pad. It's like kind of sleazy. And it was like, but what if he has a really good reason for using it? Like what if his dad passed away and they spent all this time here? And I just came up with this whole elaborate world in which to make this plumber a really sympathetic character.
Amazing. I have to agree with Cindy in the chat. She said, what a good clue. I think that's very perceptive of you and your family.
I'll talk to Kat Steadman, and yeah, I'll jump in that one next time for the next open house.
For sure. Okay, so this question is for everyone. I am super curious to know what your writing process was like for this book. Did you do any kind of research? A couple of you talked about that a little bit, but I'm curious to know more in depth. And did you draw on any inspiration from other books out there, or movies, or was it all just from your own head? Beck, why don't you start?
I guess I wanted to just write. I'd never written a novel before, and I wanted to give everyone a really happy ending because my memoir sort of ends on this like sad note. And so I wanted to have a really I wanted all of my characters to go through something challenging and to end up happier than they began. And so I thought a lot about what gives me that sort of comfort. And Gilmore Girls, the show, it's been off air for a long time, but it was like, I go to that every fall when it starts to get dark and I start to get sad because it's winter. I go to that. So how can I kind of bring that onto the page? And then as far as research goes, I spent a ton of time on the Jersey Shore. I've waited tables throughout high school, college. I even did it for research for this book. And the other thing that kind of happens, especially when you're researching a summer book, is I went down a rabbit hole of how fireworks happen. And so now I know a lot about what it requires to set off fireworks on a barge.
Okay, that. Chuck, how about you?
Yeah, it's like process wise, it's fairly mundane. It's I say that, but my last book, Wanderers, I learned that I don't know how to write a book. And it's terrible because I'm a writer, as it turns out, and I should maybe know how to write a book, but I view it as a good thing because it means that every book I enter it differently, and every book is its own animal, and I can't just write this book the way the book before it was written. And it really sort of broke my process. My process used to be that 2,000 words a day, button chair, kind of like, Wanderers divested me of any belief that I can do that. And, Book of Accents was the same way. It was one of those books that was sort of erratically born. Some days were 300 words and some days were 3,000 words. I just sort of made sure I sat down and wrote something every day. And the kind of inspirations that go into it are not only obviously my life, because I grew up in Pennsylvania and I also just moved back to the region in which I lived. And I brought, my family with me. So, but it's also, all those great horror reads from like the 1980s. There's like paperbacks where you would break the spine. Unfortunately, I'm so sorry to your family, but the spines were broken on those books. And, that and like that sort of Spielbergian sort of like, that families on an adventure, families under duress, and sort of the journeys of kids is sort of packed in there too. And it's all sort of bundled in there. Like it's one of those things that I want to feel familiar to those people who read those kinds of books in the 80s and 90s, but also to be very much a story that's ideally my own and born from all of the whatever's going on up here in my heart.
I love it. And Lauren?
This was I would say one of my more challenging books personally for me to write, because I did probably the majority of some of the writing and the majority of the editing, during the lockdown, which was, indescribably awful for everyone. But one of the, as far as like the process was totally, I guess it's like a short way of saying that my process was totally different this time. Typically I sound like Chuck used to be, or how I thought it was. I always like very disciplined, a certain word count a day. I'm blown away by 2,000, by the way. I'm totally intimidated, but just like a set, it always like worked around my kids' schedules. Like when they went to school, I sat down and wrote, and when that bus pulled up at 3, it was over, and this was just how it went. And that just got blown up on every level. We had kids home and no quiet time and all kinds of other craziness. But as far as like the inspiration, a lot of what I kind of explore in the book is really like what life looks like from a child raising perspective in like a certain type of town in America. And I use like my fictional town Paradise, which is a suburb of New York, but I really think it could be a suburb anywhere, a suburb of any city that has like, primarily professionals who are pushing their kids towards good colleges. And there's loads of these places, and I live in one of them. And people are crazy, like they're crazy. And it's a fascinating thing to see. Like I was inspired definitely by like the whole college admission scandal. And we all kind of know that if your kid doesn't row, you don't put them on a rowing machine and take pictures of them and apply them to college as a rower. Like, we can agree that that's not a great call. But what we can't seem to agree on, and what I really wanted to explore in the book, was where is the line? You know, in these kind of communities, in these towns where people are able to give their kid every type of advantage, from, you know, squash coaches when they're 3 to, you know, every imaginable type of tutor through the school years to SAT prep, and I mean, to far more than that. You know, where is the line? Where's the ethical line? Where's the legal line? Where's the moral line? And that was really what sort of kicked off the inspiration for the book to me, was thinking about that. You know, very obvious in one area, not so obvious in all the other areas, including things I do for my own children. So that was, you know, what really kind of caught my attention with this one.
That's great. Okay, so, well, Lauren, you did just address this a bit, but I'm curious if we can like shift gears in terms of like challenges that you faced when you were writing your books. I'm thinking more specifically like any plot issues you struggled with, or trying to like channel a character that was really hard to like flesh out. I'm curious, just because we always hear like the flowery language of like, this character just came to me, but I always love hearing like what was one thing that was like you really stumbled over. Chuck, why don't you go first?
Yeah, it's weird. Books are weird. They're just so hard. They're so hard. They're so hard to write. And you know, Wanderers was a weird book for me because I wrote that one in a first draft and it maintained mostly its form in the second draft. But Book of Accidents, it's one of those like made in editing kind of books. The one where the first draft was that like just hunk of stone dropped, like an obelisk dropped from the sky, and you have to sort of keep shaving it and carving it and chipping away at it until the thing you think is in there starts to show itself. And Trisha Narwani, my editor at Del Rey, was thankfully instrumental in seeing, helping me see what was in there. And, you know, we always talk about how funny it was to edit that book, because some edits are like, okay, we'll remove these chapters and this character can't be there anymore. And just like, you take a hatchet to it and start butchering it. But this is one of those ones where you're like picking BBs out of a shot bird. You're like have to like rewire sinew and capillaries to like make the thing a different animal than it was before. So that was sort of the difficulty there. And all of that, like I wrote this before the pandemic, but the editing was happening in the middle of it. So it was already that sense of being like kind of a free floating, I don't know where we're going and I don't know what's happening in the world. So I was able to, it worked for my brain, but it was a very, just a bizarre time and a strange book to be working on, which is scary and spooky in a lot of ways.
Yeah, for sure. Becky, how about you? Or Beck, sorry.
Oh, it's okay. I would say, so there's 3 main characters. They're all in their 30s and 2 of them are guys, and they're very much men that I've encountered in my life, and they came really easily. And I struggled the most with the woman in her early 30s, because I was like, this is not me, but I know at first go, everyone's going to assume it's me. And I actually really want to point out all of the cultural stressors that are put on women in their 30s and have her sort of carry all of those in a way that she's like my voodoo doll. And it's like, oh, she just embodies all of these things that drive me so crazy, as far as, you know, curating the perfect social media presence and making sure that everything appears wonderful all the time. And I really struggled with how to make her flawed, but also palatable. And so if anything, that my opening chapter with this woman is supposed to be satirical. And then, I don't know, it was really hard to be like, I hope people know that this isn't who I admire.
Yeah, that can be hard, I'm sure. And Lauren?
I would say probably COVID things not related, because there was a moment, probably like everyone on here, where I'm thinking like summer read, happy ending, beach bag, cocktails, you know, and you're just like, it's like all just like darkness around you. Like, will we be there? Will we ever be there? So that was sort of like a bizarre, disparate, like strange thing to be dealing with creatively that I had obviously like never really thought of before. But specific to this book, I would say it's the first time I like completely threw out like 3/4 of the book the first time, which I am loath to do. I will cut like 11 words and keep them like in a file and find a way to use them later. I mean, no matter what, I do not throw out words lightly. And I had written this in a way that, you know, whatever like the scandal and the secret that happened was similar, but it had been executed by one of the women's husbands, by one of the two sisters' husbands. And I wrote the whole book, and it was like a very similar feel, but by like 3/4 of the way through, I'm like, I cannot make this work because my characters, my women, my two strong sisters are just reacting to these men. Like all their whole story, the whole plot is just like in reaction to something that someone else in their lives did, and it just didn't feel right. So I scrapped it and went back and rewrote from you know, where, again, like without giving too much away, really just wanting the, you know, specifically like one of the women to take responsibility. She makes an awful choice. She does something really terrible and shows a complete lack of judgment, and worse, and she needs to dig herself out from it, which felt a lot better and a lot more authentic and drove the timing and the storyline for me much better than just having her kind of like mindlessly react to something that just sort of happened to her.
Yeah, I love that.
I don't know why I couldn't have foreseen that from the beginning. It would have saved everyone a lot of time, but I couldn't.
Well, we're glad you found your path eventually. I'm realizing that we are at time right now, and I realize that may have been a bummer ending of a question, but I really, really appreciated you all being here. I, again, loved reading your books so much. They were all great summer reads to me, so thank you for helping me escape just a little bit from the world we're in. And yeah, I'll hand it back over to Katie. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nada.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again to our last summer reads panel. We really appreciate it. And thank you to the audience for being here with us this evening. We know that it's difficult to take some time, especially with the weather getting nicer and things opening back up. So we really do appreciate your time and being here. We hope to see you again real soon. Hopefully in person down the road, but we hope you all have a lovely evening and a fantastic summer. And now you have all of the summer reads from this past evening's event to pack into those beach bags. Have a lovely night and see you all soon.